Imagine this. A single earthquake on the far side of the Pacific is so powerful that hours later, volcanoes in the United States start breathing together. Not with smoke or lava, but with invisible pulses deep underground, beating in the same rhythm. As if a whole mountain range just woke up and took a slow, deliberate breath. Scientists watch their screens in disbelief. If a distant megaquake can make an entire volcanic arc hum like this, what happens when one of those giants finally answers with an eruption? July 29, 2025. Off Russia's remote Kamchatka Peninsula, the planet jolts. At 23:24 UTC, a magnitude 8.8 earthquake tears through the boundary of the Pacific Plate. One of the largest quakes ever measured in that region. Tsunami alerts ripple out across the ocean. Sirens sound in Alaska, Japan, Hawaii, and along Pacific coasts worldwide as scientists race to calculate wave heights and arrival times. For most people, the story ends there. A huge quake, a tense wait, then relief as the tsunami turns out smaller than feared. But for scientists in the Pacific Northwest of the United States, the real story is just beginning. In the hours after the Kamchatka quake, seismometers scattered across Washington, Oregon, and Northern California begin to record an unusual pattern. These instruments, part of the Pacific Northwest Seismic Network and the U.S. Geological Survey's Cascades Volcano Observatory, are used to seeing the planet ring after major earthquakes. Normally, that ringing looks messy, complex vibrations, random-looking wiggles, as seismic waves bounce through Earth's interior. This time, it looks different. Underneath some of America's most dangerous volcanoes, Mount Rainier, Mount St. Helens, Mount Hood, the Three Sisters, even Mount Shasta, tiny, nearly identical tremor-like signals appear. They are too small for anyone to feel, but on the screens they stand out with eerie precision. Each burst of motion is followed by silence. Then, almost exactly 11 minutes later, another burst. Then another. Then another. It's as if the Cascade Range has developed a heartbeat. Across more than 40 seismic stations, from Mount Baker near the Canadian border down to Shasta in Northern California, the same rhythm emerges. Faint pulses, separated by nearly perfect intervals, recorded beneath different volcanoes at almost the same time. This is not what normal aftershocks look like. Aftershocks are scattered and chaotic. This is organized, repeating, synchronized. When the data is pulled together in the following hours, researchers realize they're seeing something they've never documented before in this arc. A coordinated, tremor-like response across multiple volcanoes to a single, distant megaquake. The first instinct is caution. Everyone remembers that great earthquakes can send seismic waves through the whole planet. After the 2004 Sumatra quake and the 2011 Tohoku quake in Japan, seismologists observed Earth ringing for days. But those signals weren't usually tied so cleanly to volcanic systems in a single region. Here, in 2025, the pattern is concentrated on the Cascades. That immediately raises the question nobody wants to ignore. Are these volcanoes getting ready to erupt? To answer that, scientists dig into the rest of the monitoring data. The Cascades are among the best-watched volcanoes on the planet. Networks of instruments measure almost everything that could hint at magma on the move. Seismometers listen for swarms of small earthquakes that might mark fractures opening as magma rises. GPS receivers and tilt meters track tiny changes in the shape of the ground, millimeters of uplift or tilt that can betray an inflating magma chamber. Gas sensors monitor for changes in emissions like sulfur dioxide and carbon dioxide, which often spike when fresh magma reaches shallow depths. Satellites scan for subtle increases in surface temperature around craters and flanks. If multiple volcanoes were suddenly gearing up to erupt, there should be signs. Clusters of shallow quakes under summits, steady inflation of volcanic edifices, new gas anomalies, or hotspots appearing in thermal imagery. But in late July and early August 2025, none of those classic eruption precursors appear. Monitoring summaries from the Cascades Volcano Observatory say the same thing. All volcanoes remain at normal background levels. The weird pulses are real, but they are not accompanied by magma pushing toward the surface. So if magma isn't rising, what exactly is shaking? One way to imagine it is to think of the Earth as an enormous bell, and the Kamchatka earthquake as a massive hammer blow. The energy from a magnitude 8.8 event doesn't just stay near the epicenter. It sends different kinds of seismic waves through the mantle and crust, circling the globe multiple times. When those waves reach regions with complex structures, like subduction zones, where one plate dives beneath another, and where magma and fluids are stored, they can interact with them in subtle ways. Under the Cascades, magma bodies, hot rocks, and pressurized fluids sit in a layered, complicated plumbing system. When the long-period waves from the Kamchatka quake pass through, they may jostle that system just enough to set it vibrating. Not a violent slosh that drives magma upward, but a gentle wobble that makes existing cracks in fluid pathways resonate for a while. Some researchers call this kind of response volcanic microresonance, a low-level, temporary reaction of volcanic systems to strong seismic shaking elsewhere on the planet. It's like flicking the side of a wine glass. You don't shatter it, but you can make it sing. Others see hints of another process. At great depths along subduction zones, parts of the plate interface sometimes slip almost silently, in events known as slow slip or slow earthquakes. They don't produce the sharp jolts of regular quakes, but instead involve gradual movement, spread over hours or days. Some of the 2025 pulses recorded under the Cascades have characteristics that resemble these deep, slow adjustments more than shallow volcanic tremor. That leads to the idea that the Kamchatka quake may have slightly changed stresses along hidden faults beneath the Cascades, prompting small, synchronized slips that showed up as those repeating signals. Either way, the implication is the same. The Cascades are not isolated, self-contained entities. They are plugged into the larger tectonic system of the Pacific. And that system is already dangerous on its own. Long before the Kamchatka quake, the Cascades have been known as one of North America's most hazardous volcanic arcs. They owe their existence to another subduction zone, the Juan de Fuca Plate, sliding beneath North America, offshore of Washington, Oregon, and Northern California. That same process not only feeds magma to volcanoes like Rainier, Hood, St. Helens, and Shasta, but also drives the locked segment of the Cascadia subduction zone, which is capable of producing magnitude 9 earthquakes of its own. Within the arc, each major volcano has its own risk profile. Mount Rainier towers above the Puget Sound region, its flanks draped in thick ice. Even a modest eruption or large landslide on Rainier could melt enough glacier ice to trigger Lahar's fast-moving volcanic mudflows, charge down river valleys toward communities built on old Lahar deposits. Hazard maps show paths where these flows could travel all the way to populated areas in less than an hour. That's why Rainier consistently ranks near the top of U.S. volcano hazard lists. Mount St. Helens has already shown what a Cascade volcano can do when it explodes. On May 18, 1980, a lateral blast and massive landslide reshaped the mountain and devastated an area larger than some small countries. 57 people died. Ash traveled across the continent. The volcano resumed quieter dome-building activity from 2004 to 2008, proving it is anything but extinct. Mount Hood stands near Portland, a metro area of more than 2 million people. Its eruptions in the last 1,000 years have included lava domes and pyroclastic flows, with future events expected to send debris and mud into river valleys that connect directly to populated corridors and key infrastructure. Farther south, Mount Shasta dominates the Northern California skyline. It has erupted multiple times in the last few thousand years and sits along major transportation routes. Even a moderate eruption there could seriously disrupt road and air traffic, while ashfall and lahars threaten nearby communities. And those are just the famous peaks. Lesser-known volcanoes like Glacier Peak, Newberry, and the Three Sisters have all erupted in the geologically recent past and show signs of active hydrothermal and magmatic systems today. The 2025 Kamchatka triggered pulses did not change the official alert levels at any of these volcanoes. They did, however, deliver a message that's hard to ignore. These systems are sensitive. They can respond to events far away in ways that our instruments are only now beginning to capture. For residents of the Pacific Northwest, that doesn't mean an eruption is imminent. USGS updates still describe activity as background for the Cascade volcanoes. There is no evidence that magma is on the move toward the surface at Rainier, St. Helens, Hood, or other major peaks right now. But the region's history guarantees that at some point in the future, one or more of these volcanoes will erupt again. The real question is not will an eruption happen, but will we be ready when it does? Readiness is built during quiet periods like this one, not in the middle of a crisis. Communities near lahar pathways need to know their evacuation routes. Schools in at-risk valleys should practice drills that assume only tens of minutes of warning. Emergency managers must keep hazard maps current and communicate them in ways that are easy for residents to understand. Land use planners need to consider where critical infrastructure is built, whether it makes sense to keep expanding residential zones on top of old lahar deposits. On the personal level, people who live in volcano hazard zones can do many of the same things recommended for earthquake and tsunami. Preparedness. Have a go bag ready. Know where to go if an alert sounds, and pay attention to information from official sources rather than rumors or dramatic headlines. Because if there is one lesson from the Kamchatka quake and the Cascades whispering response, it is that the Earth is more interconnected than it appears on a flat map. A rupture in Russia can ring through the American Northwest. A volcanic system that looks calm on the surface can still respond to deep, distant forces passing through the planet. The mountains we see as symbols of stability are, in reality, slow-moving stories of change. For now, the mysterious pulses have faded. The graphs have returned to the usual noise of wind, waves, and tiny local quakes. The official status of the Cascade volcanoes is back to that deceptively soothing phrase, normal background activity. But normal, in a volcanic arc, sits on top of immense potential energy. The silence is not permanent. The next big change might not be triggered by a distant megaquake. It might come from within, from magma slowly rising, from faults adjusting, from pressure building, until something has to give. When that moment comes, the difference between a catastrophe and a hard but survivable disaster will depend less on what the volcano does, and more on what people did beforehand. So, as Earth continues to ring quietly after that 8.8 quake, its vibrations still circling the globe, fading into the background, one question remains. For everyone living in the shadow of the Cascades, will you wait for the mountain to shout? Or will you listen while it still whispers? And if you want to keep following those whispers, the strange pulses, the quiet swarms, the subtle hints that these giants are never truly asleep, subscribe now, turn on the bell, and stay with BayanTube. Here, every hidden signal becomes a story you can understand, before it becomes a headline you can't escape.